But what inspired to enter the world of clinical research?
Well, I've always enjoyed research. Actually, before the reason why I even
So, tell us more about Naantu research. What is a mission, and how does it fill a gap in clinical research? Welcome to Life Science Insights podcast. I'm Sandal Karnanidhi, and today we're exploring personal journey, diversity, governance in clinical research and clinical trial. Our guest for today is Golda, founder and CEO of Naantu Research, a company specializes in solutions for life sciences. Welcome to the show, Golda.
thank you, Cynthia, for having me.
Okay. Can you start by telling us a bit about your background and what led you to your current role or focus?
Okay, so I'm a trained. I still consider myself a scientist because that's my background in biochemistry. I did that a long time ago, and so a lot of what I studied years ago, and I have, of course, my postgraduate also in clinical research. So with that, my background has always been based in the science, and I progressively moved from the physical sciences to the clinical sciences, and I've done that for over 20 years. I kind of found the clinical science quite by accident. I was more along the lines of wanting to be based along the GLP. So, clinical trials is more GCP. My background had a training initially of GLP and GMP. When I say GLP, good lab practices and good manufacturing practices, because I used to be the student president of the ISPE, which I think the organization is still around. So I drove that quite a bit and had all these process analytical techniques, and I was going in that direction. And things just happened to have turned around when years ago, decades ago, the province of Ontario had a project by former premier Dalton McGuinty, and it was an experiment, sort of. This was before the Mars Building and things like the Ontario Clinical Research Ethics Board, which is a centralized REB. But I was part of that initial nucleus and group, and right now, people in Ontario will know about a network of networks. Some of those initial people, I know some of those people, but at that time I was very young. I was enthusiastic. Whatever project they came my way, I jumped on it. So it was really just sort of like an accident. I kind of just fell into it, but my scientific training and analytical sense, and also I'm very good at being comfortable with ambiguity, was what has made me successful over the last few decades. So my manager, my boss at the time, was somebody who was very, very. I never considered him as a boss. They were more of a mentor, and I think when you get a chance to have people like that in your life, you want to jump and take advantage of it. So long story short, that was how I went from moving the direction of good lab practices, good manufacturing practices, wanting to be more, do more of the sort of like preclinical, more scientific in the bench type work, and then move into the clinical side, where I got put on I think it was a project that was being rolled out to centralize clinical research and how trials are done, to attract more research to Ontario specifically, just because we were losing trials. And so that's how I got into it. And then I moved from the site level, the government site level,
Okay.
then went to the industry side, and then now, of course, I'm on the consultant. I'm an expert, if you want to call it that. So hopefully that wasn't too much, but that gives you a quick summation of how my journey sort of started and where I am right now.
Okay. Yeah, that's inspiring to me. And yeah, a lot of inspiration, from this. But what inspired to enter the world of clinical research?
Well, I've always enjoyed research. Actually, before the reason why I even took a look at that position, which I got hired for, which, by the way, I wasn't qualified for. I've always said this over the years. Every interview that I've done, whether it was for work or for a consult or for something like this, I wasn't qualified to have done that job. Was a project manager role. At that time, I didn't even know project management was the job we were
Yeah.
doing. And I still remember to this day, the person who had the interview before me had well over 10 years of experience. I had zero. I was basically a fresh, graduate. I had no experience. I had no understanding of project management. But the reason why I mentioned this, and the reason why I mentioned also my mentor, is that Clinical research is exactly that. It involves science and investigation, and our industry has come to this point whereby they want people to have 10,000 years of experience before they get into it. And I've always said, when you're interviewing people, you have to look at their aptitude and their way of analyzing how they resolve issues. I think people with those qualities are best suited for any sort of scientific rigor, and also especially for clinical trials involving human research. That aside, my love for research in general and my love for really medical science. At one point, I thought I wanted to be a physician, and right. So I've always enjoyed that aspect. Anything clinical, anything scientific, and just sort of married both. I realized that I'm not, having been at the hospital when I did, I worked in the hospital doing the project management of sort of rolling out that situation. I realized how you deal with patients, but I realized that I enjoyed more the scientific aspect, and I realized that having evidence-based research to support medicine was what was more interesting to me, because I learned the medicine. If you really go back, it started off more of as an art form with some science, and in later years to where we are now has become more scientific in nature. But for years it wasn't something that was more that scientific, that quantitative. It was qualitative in a lot of ways. Things like Chinese medicine, anything like Ayurvedic medicine, any sort of herbal medicine. Medicine has been around as long as human beings have been around. But the scientific evidence-based piece is what things like clinical trials has brought to it. Along with some accidents that have happened along the way, which we can talk about. Anybody we can talk about or choose not to talk about, but that is what has interested me: the ability to really make sure that what we're putting into our bodies, it's something that is safe, is something that can help us improve our lives and live better lives. So that's why I really have been in the industry this long.
Very nice. You have a lot of passion towards the clinical research.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, nice. So,
I don't see it. Let me put it this way. I don't see it as I think my approach has always been along the lines of those who think of clinical research as part of patient care, not something that is separate. For me,
separate.
it's
Yeah.
an option. It's something that, and I think that's why I've also been in oncology for so long. Oncology research, I've been I mean, my oncology expertise, I have other therapeutic backgrounds that I've touched, but my true expertise is in oncology. And it's because most of oncology research gives clinical trials as an option to patients. It's actually something that patients want to be able to participate in. And so when you see it in that way, where it's sort of like one of the many options that are available to patients, and it's not that you're
Patients.
being a guinea pig,
Okay.
then you feel like you're actually then contributing to
Contribute.
the well-being of society and the world as a whole. So that's my mindset when it comes to clinical trials.
Very nice. So, tell us more about Naantu research. What is a mission, and how does it fill a gap in clinical research?
So two things. Naantu was, I after I had been in the industry for a while, I realized that, and the industry is changing with AI, with tech. Last year, I spent a lot of time on the tech side. I've been trying to get more on the digital health side of things. It has evolved a lot. When I first got into trials, we were using things like paper CRFs. We went to then the electronic database and started using eCRFs. And then there's
Okay.
been a lot of evolution. And even though it was slow and there's a lot of
Mm.
slow adaptation, now it has really sped up. And so for me, I realized that number one, when I first got in the industry, there were a lot of people who looked like me and who looked like you.
Mm.
And I'm just being honest about that. Number one, when I say who looked at me, being a woman, you know, even when it comes to things like women's research, I think we're in 2025, and I may have to check this, but it was either 2023 or 2024 last year when, no, it must have been 2023. I think the fall winter of 2023, when President Biden in the United States actually finally signed a to have a women's research set up. But there's, I think, if I'm going off of memory here, so pardon me. But the point I'm trying to make is even women's research is far behind general clinical research, right? So there are lots of gaps and holes. And recently, anybody who's an expert in the clinical trial industry will realize that the ICH E3, which is a regulation has rolled out, along the line, and also with the E8, R8 module, is really trying to harmonize and really bring everybody who contributes to research to participate and not be based on data of just a small segment of people in the world. So in summary, I stayed this long in clinical trials, number one, because I realized that there weren't a lot of other people who were, especially people of color, who were not participating in trials, either administrating the trials or participating as patients. So I wanted to find ways and means by which I could contribute to that, either by being part of the process so that I can understand it better, make sure that we're providing better service to all people, but also specifically to underrepresented populations, and to find ways and means in which I could contribute to having everybody sort of join hands to contribute to the data. Because the more people we have in the process, the enriched data we have, and the better information we have, and the better drugs, if needed, drugs or even devices, because clinical research is not left to just drugs. But if you expand it, then it affects drugs, it affects food even, and it affects nutrition, devices, and drugs, if you take the bigger picture. So the more hands and people you can have involved in the process, then you have better and higher quality of living.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That's true. You wear many hats, like a clinical research professional, project leader, innovator. How do you balance these roles while staying impact-driven Naantu research?
So for me, they're not separated. And that's one thing I realized over the years. I started to, when I first started, one of the things that I've constantly, when I have the chance to talk about, if you look on LinkedIn, you realize that I was part of the national BioTalent had this. We basically put together descriptions for different roles in the industry, and I was part of this group of people who help to make sure that companies, if they are wanting to hire, whether it's a clinical trial manager, project manager, clinical research associate, these are all just random titles in the industry, like the sort of like qualities you're looking for. And I'm linking it back to what I said at the outset. To me, and in my experience, the most important, the people who I have seen who have succeeded and who have a true sense of and passion like I do of contributing to not just the industry, but also society as a whole, are those who can deal with ambiguity. There's a lot of gray in trials. As much as we have so many regulations and rules, the reason why we continue to update regulations and update the rules is because there's always room for improvement. Anytime there's a new sort of like a thing like AI right now. You get a whole set of new ways in which you have to conduct the research to make sure that patient safety is still something that is high on the agenda. And so it's never ending. If you're somebody like me who is always, you don't want to be stuck with one thing. The clinical trial, drug development, or pharmaceutical industry is a great one because you can wear multiple hats. So, for example, when I worked at Pfizer, you sometimes get siloed. If you work in a big company, you get to work on maybe just one role. But I enjoy working with the smaller companies, and hence why I started to do things like Naantu, because when I work with clients, my client sets tend to be those who are small to medium-sized companies. I rarely work with big companies like the Pfizers and the GSKs, but I work with the either startups or like those who are medium-sized, because there's a lot more experimentation, and that's why I succeeded in that first role. My mentor allowed me to be somebody who's creative, somebody who can basically use the rules, but at the same time apply things like the concepts like process initiatives to streamline, to build quality processes into the process, to ensure that you're getting the right outputs and the right data sets to be able to inform what we're looking at from whatever molecule or device that we're trying to get on the market to improve the lives of patients. So you have to think of it as a whole, and then it comes under the bigger umbrella of healthcare. So when I connected the dots, I realized that as long as it involves health, remember I told you I wanted to be a doctor. So I realized that if it's improving the health of people, especially if it's underrepresented people, I'm interested. I always want to have some understanding of the process. I'm not a big fan of the commercial aspects of drug development per se, but I also want to understand and really get that it's important to an extent, because you need to find ways in which you market the products that you're putting on the market, because it's an expensive process, but also do so in a way that still fulfills the ethics of people. And there's always a bit of a balance there, and that can be a whole other conversation for another day that we can have. But the point is that for me, I realized that it's all connected, from discovery of either a product or a drug, to get into the hands of healthcare providers and the patients, and that how patients also are involved in the process is all connected. And it's all very important to make sure that we are constantly improving the data that we're getting and the products that we're getting on the market, so that, again, we all live better lives, and we can all live to, maybe greater than 100 years old if needed. And 100 years old, that is, it's not 100 years old where you're senile, but 100 years old where you're active and maybe you can even run a race.
Yeah. It's very inspirational, Golda.
I'm glad you're inspired.
Okay, very nice. So what challenges did you face while building Naantu, and how did your experience in the past help you overcome them?
So it's still ongoing. Right now, I've been in a bit of a tight spot, I'll be honest with you. Naantu is, for me right now, because of like I said last year, because of all the tech that has happened, and also because of all so a couple of things. In the last few years, and I think you have it as one of the questions, one of the things that suddenly became important, that people started talking about patient diversity and, patient centricity is like one of those terms we've heard in the industry for a long time, and nobody was taking it seriously. We all like to throw it around and, make it sound good and talk about presentations, but it really wasn't that important, if I'm being honest. And then patient diversity started to come into play. And then when regulators like the FDA and not even like EMEA now started to force companies to ensure that when they are even putting together their trials, they're having all these patient recruitment plans that ensure that there's a diversity of patients. And when I talk about diversity, I'm not just talking about people of color, because I think people think of diverse patients as just that. Diverse patients include old people, children where appropriate, people of color, of course, women, making sure that the data set that you're providing for a specific area of therapy, as much as possible, is representative of all those people who, the catchment of people who may be besieged by that particular disease as applicable, or health issue. So I've realized that the challenge is that when you're a smaller company, and when there's been an avalanche of change, which has been really rapid, especially the last 2 to 3 years, it makes it sometimes challenging to keep up. And when there are political upheavals, and also, maybe, I guess if you want to wade into financial or somewhat regulatory, like tariffs from the US, which is impacting everybody globally, then when you're a small player, it becomes challenging. So for me, I would say like 2020, especially 2021, 2022 were fantastic years. I was very busy, in fact, too busy. But it's been challenging because a lot of clients that I had were mostly US. Canada is not necessarily the best place for in terms of the clients that I had, and it's been a struggle. So with all these changes, from the US, I've struggled to keep even some of my old clients. I've been struggling to get newer clients, and it's partly not because they don't want to have me; it's because they don't want to deal with the regulation changes, and sometimes they want to have to deal with just US-based companies,
Yes.
And so that is one of the things that I'm really struggling with. In the beginning, it was more trying to get people to really see myself as an expert, and then I got that established, and then I was getting the clients, and now the reverse issue is that. But like I said, it's an industry that I can foresee constantly changing. I'm somebody who usually tackles challenges as they come on head on. I really find solutions to it, but this particular issue I found has been very difficult for me, and also hence why I went ahead and I accepted this podcast. One of the things that science people don't do very well is things like branding. So it's a new aspect for me. The marketing piece, the branding is still something that is new. Trying to make sure that I'm still very scientific in my way of thinking. For years, people in my industry would not even bother with things like LinkedIn and things like this. But now, if you don't do it, you basically will not survive. And you know that saying, like you either have to innovate or you will die. So if there's a challenge, that's the biggest challenge right now, and I'm doing my best to be as flexible as I can, and also not just to be also stuck with just sort of like the client base I'm dealing with. For example, devices are not something that I have a huge experience, and I have maybe just about 5 years of experience in it. But it's included things like class 3 devices in vitro diagnostics and things like that, which I've done in the past and continue to look for. But I've decided to increase my range. Ideally, I like to deal with things like the oncology studies and things like that. But yeah, to me, that's where I'm a true expert. But I also decided that if it's AI, if I can understand it, if it's partnering with even vendor companies who are maybe deploying some sort of like AI platform that will help to streamline the process, ensure that patients are having a better experience, a better recruitment experience. For example, there's a client of mine, they're a vendor. They have an AI platform. And so what I did was set up a deal where basically I make sure that if I'm having clients and they can use the platform, then I can get some sort of like remuneration from that. So in summary, I've had
Summary.
to learn how to pivot a lot
Yes,
in the
that's
last few
true.
years and find ways in which I can continue to make sure I can keep the lights on. But it's been challenging, I would say. I can tell that of the 20 plus years I've been in the industry, the last 2 years or year and a half
Yes.
have been more difficult
Yes.
than the past 20 years. In the past, it was me trying to understand the science, the tech,
Science.
the process, the regulations and those things. But now it's really making sure I get the business and push like,
Business.
yeah. Before I didn't need to, I was used to people like you reaching out to me on LinkedIn. I never bothered with I didn't even have my picture on LinkedIn for a long time. I
Wow.
didn't bother. People found me. I didn't have to do anything,
Uh,
right? Because
yeah.
I'm an expert. I expect people to find me. But now I'm
Mm,
chasing people. They're not responding.
okay.
It's and it's like I said, when you're a small company and you work with just a
Yes.
small group of people, it's difficult. But
Difficult.
I'm still up to it. But I'm also not opposed to if things get too difficult. Maybe I may decide to go back and be working with a company. I will probably never get rid of Naantu. I always like to consult if I have the chance, but
Okay.
if I need to, again, that's part of being versatile. If I need to go back to some company and somebody wants to hire me as a VP of ClinOps or director or whatever. Why not? I'm not going to say no to that. But I've worked hard. I'm at the point whereby I think I have these options, and so I'm looking at them, all of them, carefully. But when you're somebody who has an entrepreneurial and scientific mindset, it tends to be difficult for you to just give some of those things up. But like I said, I have to look at the bigger picture. As long as I'm contributing, because that's my as in the French would say, raison d'être, which is your reason of being. That's my true purpose. If I keep my purpose in mind that I want to contribute to the health and well-being of people in whatever aspect of it, and if I can find it in whatever I'm doing, then at least I can sleep well at night.
Oh, interesting. Uh, how do you envision Nantu evolving in next 3 to 5 years in terms of global impact and technological innovation?
I'm glad you asked that question. So I said all these challenges up front, but one of the things I'm also trying to do in line with the vision and mission of Naantu, which is really, even though we're a small player, really tiny player, doesn't mean that you can't have an impact. And one of the regions of the world that I'm trying to, so I have worked on global studies in the past. I've worked on global studies, sitting in, whether I've sat in Canada or the US, because at one point I was living in the US. I've worked on global studies, have had wide reach and recruited patients in places like Japan or Australia or some parts of the African continent. But one of the areas that I've realized that certain places like South America, the South American, the Latin places, and also the African continent are areas that are I would love to continue to see if I can partner with folks to start to expand research. And the reason this came about, I would say a few years ago, I remember I was doing some work there and somebody was like, oh, this is happening somewhere far in Africa. It's not going to bother us. And then people forget that people travel. Somebody went on a plane. Suddenly Ebola was happening somewhere in Dallas and people were in a panic. And a company, I think they're still around, FHI, I think they're still around. They reached out at the time. They wanted me to see if I would be willing to go down to some of the countries they've selected on the African continent to set up studies because they had never had trials there. And I was excited. I wanted to be part of it. But I realized there was so much to do. The trouble was, of course, I was Canadian. This is an American company, and this was even pre-Trump. It involved a lot of paperwork which they didn't want to deal with, and hence why I didn't bother doing that. But then it sparked my thinking, going, okay, this is a serious disease, and they are literally going into a space where people don't understand what clinical trials is. Even in Canada, as recently as I think it was last year, April, I went to an event and, this is Canada. So I expected everybody, and this was a room full of people. There were physicians, clinicians. So I was for obesity and, somebody had invited me and I wanted to go and understand the progress they were making. Because at that time, things like the GLP-1s, the Ozempics were all hot and everybody's talking about it. So I was like, I've done some work in endocrinology. So I was like, okay, let's see what's the latest and greatest that is happening here. But I was surprised. People were asking, there were a lot of clinicians, nurses, doctors in the audience who still did not really understand how clinical research was important to things like endocrinology. And I remember being flabbergasted. I was like, this is Canada, this is Toronto. And these are questions that I asked myself well over 20 years ago. And people were asking those questions. And these are not lay people. These are people who are supposed to be sort of like, in the industry. So I remember thinking, well, if this is happening in Toronto and Canada, then you can imagine in places, in certain places where is they're underrepresented. Number one, their socioeconomic conditions may not be the greatest. So you may not have the best education in terms of how you can use things like clinical trials or clinical research to effectively improve clinical outcomes, number one, and also improve the well-being of patients and make sure that patients understand the process and it can be effective participants in the process. So that got me thinking that last year and this year, I've been trying to reach out to people who may be experts or wanting to do things on the content. I'm continuing to do that. Currently, there's a project I'm trying to see. Nothing has happened, but I'm trying to see if we can get this particular project running on the continent. They have a few centers in East and West Africa. And if I can be part of that, I'll be very excited. So I've run studies sitting in there, sort of like, global project person. And then maybe we have some of the studies, like maybe a lung study, we have something running in South Africa, that sort of thing. But I haven't been that intimately involved in that sense, where almost wanting to be able to get on the ground. And that's where I'm trying to pivot to. I don't know if it will be successful, but I think if I can do that successfully, it will also then add to the rich data and wanting patients of all backgrounds participating in the trials. And it also then adds to the mission and vision of what Naantu can do. Even if we're a small player, even if it's just one project that I get to do, I think to me, I'll count it as a success.
Yeah, that's a good impact, right? So you always have to be impactful to the people.
Yes.
Okay. Since we talked about the diversity, I have a few questions on the diversity. Why
Sure.
is diversity in clinical trial still such a pressing issue? And how is your work helping to shift the narrative?
So I think I have a presentation somewhere on this, but one of the aspects in actually the new ICH E6, E3, it's not a new thing, but I think it was even in E6R2 and has been expanded and further clarified in E6R3, which is a regulation for how do I say ICH, International Clinical. When you get used to acronyms, you start to forget what they stand for. Harmonization, good clinical practice.
Okay.
I've said this for over 2 decades now. I'm sorry, I'm struggling to remember what it stands for. But anywho, and which is weird because I actually train people on this. But forget give my momentary lapse of recall. The point I'm trying to make is one of the aspects is quality management. Now,
Okay.
when it comes to clinical studies, one of the sad aspects for me has been that over the years, I did realize that and the reason why I stay so long and I continue to be part of the industry, even though it's been a struggle the last few years and it's sort of, I'm not sure where it will go. For a long time, I used to feel isolated. Now, in terms of even people who had roles like whether you were a coordinator, an investigator, a clinical research associate, a project manager, and the higher up you went, the less diverse people you used to see. Over the years, it has improved. But my question is this: depending on certain companies and certain institutions and establishments, if you have it only in the hands of a specific group of people, and I'm not going to mention because I try to be neutral in my way of approach. For me, because I'm apolitical, number one, and I tend to be a globalist in my viewpoint. I'm from Toronto, so Toronto is one of the most diverse, if not the most diversity in the world. I I tend to see people want to see people as people in their full element, regardless of their regardless of their phenotype, right? So, but when you have sort of like power or ideas sort of always like locked in the hands of a certain phenotypic demographic, right, group of people who control the process and maybe may not allow for a wide range of ideas or ways of doing things, then becomes a problem, right? And hence why even the regulators have now got into why, for example, E6R3 and even the FDA regulations now force companies to want to have people of all backgrounds, patients of all backgrounds participate right from the get-go when you're having patient feasibility. That means that you also then have to have people who look like them be part of the process. Because if you pause me to repeat myself, but pause me if you think what I'm saying doesn't sort of like make sense. But for me, I think the very thing that is a negative, which can then be transformed into a positive, makes it a very human endeavor, it makes it so much of a human endeavor, because that's how human beings change. Unfortunately, that's just how we operate as human beings. As long as, for me, there is a path, a way to move forward, a way to correct the wrong, acknowledge the wrong, and then set forth on the right path, then you're actually doing the right thing. And I think that one of the things that I admire in this industry and why I've stayed in it so long is that there have been multiple examples where things have gone horribly wrong, but then they have not just sat back. It has then caused things like the FDA, the EMEA, the Health Canada's, the NAMSAs in I think it's NAMSA in China, is it THD, TPH in Australia, whatever the regulatory body is, all over the world, to then be formed to make sure that we're protecting people. And that to me is a good thing. It's not a bad thing.
Okay. Yeah. A lot to talk about that. Can you share an example where the inclusive research design or a diverse participant recruitment led to more meaningful outcome?
Yeah, so not too long ago, I was part of a study. It was a global study, and it was a phase 2. I had done this multiple times, but remember I mentioned that especially the FDA started pushing. I think we're in 2025, especially around 2020, 2021, 2022. This started to become a hot topic. The FDA started to really push to have companies ensure that they have their recruitment plans, especially if it's not like a phase 1 study. They have clear recruitment plans that stipulate and show how they're including patients of different backgrounds in their data sets. And so then because my expertise also lies in the clinical operations. So it's one thing that you want to get a particular data set. You want to do get your data reads and, from what you've captured from your EDC. But before you get there, you need to make sure that your recruitment is in line with that, right? Your patient recruitment. And that involves a lot of education.
Yes.
not just education on for the clinical team, but
Mm.
also the hospital sites and hospital teams that you're working with.
Okay.
And this has been an area that is still continuing to be a challenge globally. It's still an area that is difficult to sort of manage, but depending on the country, the city, the site, the experience with clinical trials, the investigator who is participating in the trials. If you have a good recruitment plan and you have an understanding of how patients are flowing into a particular hospital, you get a good sense of the demographics of that patient population for that particular therapeutic area. You're able to get a good sense of which patients are coming in, and then how then you can then set up your plans to attract those patients who may not necessarily usually participate in trials. Understand why are they not able to participate in trials? Is this because of social determinants of health, for example? How do you overcome those? Is that something that maybe the pharmaceutical company, or maybe if it's an investigator-initiated trial, you can get a grant allocated for to ensure that patients can have their transportation, for example, covered. Maybe you want to have somebody from you want to have a home health plan where maybe patients may not be able to go to the hospital sites, but that particular data can be collected at the patient's home. Now, even if you're doing that, you need to understand then, is that something that is going to encourage those particular types of patients, or is it going to discourage them? For example, home health can be a good thing, where patients then don't need to come to the hospital sites, but then you're going to their homes. But depending, like I said, because I've run global trials, depending on the country, depending on the ethnography of the people, certain countries, certain places, that may not be a good thing. You may be stressing out the patient. For example, in certain places in Japan, you can't just have somebody go into a home because, then you're stressing the patient out. They have to maybe give them tea, and there are these nuanced sort of things to do with the culture and the socioeconomic sort of like background of the folks that still need to be rolled into that recruitment and operational plan that you're setting up to make sure that you have success and you can have effective recruitment and enrollment into the plan. So it's not just the science, it's not just the data, it's how you get those patients in, and maybe how that can then eventually maybe even be compared with real world data if necessary. Now, in clinical trials, in the true clinical trials, we may not necessarily be concerned with real world data, but if we understand some of these things, it can improve the data set and it can actually be better compared to the real world data. And so that when you actually have the drug or device out there in the world, it works that much better and it's much more comparable to how it will work in the patients and how you want it to actually behave, and make sure that you're getting those outcomes, because all these research data sets are limited. So the more you can improve it, the more you can get into real world scenarios and aspects, the better success you have post marketing. So you've noticed I connected like all the dots in all of that. So for me, like that's how I think. I just don't think of just, oh, I need to recruit the patients for this particular study and so end of story. Like I think of the whole, and I try to get as many people who are stakeholders in the process as possible. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not. But as long as I can explain my part, document it, make sure that if there's something that happens on the other end, maybe there's some sort of audit or regulatory inspection, at least I'm able to explain it, or at least to be able to ensure that, like I said, either we correct it or maybe in the next study or whatever the case may be, we have some sort of lesson learned to move forward. The key point here is that learn something, move forward, and continue to improve and have higher quality.
Right. And you're looking at the holistic view also, right? And
Exactly.
yeah, and you shared a lot of real world example. And I have one more questions to be discussed on this. How can
Sure.
the clinical research ecosystem, including the regulators, sponsors, and the site, work together to ensure equitable access?
So I think this is an ongoing um, it's an ongoing discussion. It's not that sometimes I think the problem with this is actually acknowledged in the industry. It's interesting because this industry is funny in that sense that depending on who you're talking to, sometimes people like to stick with their group. So sometimes sites are against sponsors. Sometimes sponsors are against sites. Sometimes the regulators, and the for me, for people like me who think holistically, and especially since I've had a chance to touch the different aspects of it, I realize that we're all fighting the same battle. We're literally on the same side, but for whatever reason, we tend to think that we're on different sides of the same coin, which makes no sense. But over the years, and I think it was either again last year, the last 2 years, for example, there's been a lot of discussion. I've participated in a few things, especially with this concept of AI coming on board. I was fortunate to attend an event held by the FDA in Maryland. And it was very refreshing to hear the regulators really talk and try to push in that direction. Like I said, there's been a lot of new regulation, and really that's the mindset. Patients for a long time, we talked about patient centricity, but was it truly patient centricity? It was more top down, not bottom up approach.
Okay.
But now there's a lot of people from patient advocates to the sites wanting to really get patients to inform the design of the study. So a lot of the things I mentioned, for example, about home health and whatnot, a lot of the times it just came from the experts like myself who came in. But if you have patients involved in, you can get patient information, patient voice being included from the very beginning. If you can do it effectively, some companies are doing that effectively, some are not. But those who are doing it well, right from the get-go, you can improve the design of your first to get back to your question, it comes down to communication. It comes down to effective communication, and understanding that yes, you have what you want to achieve, whether you are wearing the head of a regulator, whether you're wearing the head of a patient advocate, a healthcare provider. But at the end of the day, who are we all working for? We're working for the patient. And what is beautiful about this industry is we are both, if you want to think of it in that aspect, we're both, and I've said this years ago, I've said it in several presentations that I've had, so this is not the first time I'm saying this, but we're both if you want to think of us as a factory, for example, we're both the manufacturer and the product at the same time. Because we, at some point, either we become a patient or somebody we love becomes a patient. So if you really think of it that way, what if this is something that could affect you or somebody who's a loved one? So rather than fighting all of us, we are all working towards to improve the experience and the life of a patient, that we are indirectly that patient or directly that patient. So then if we think of it that way, then whatever aspect that we're working on, whether we're the government, whether it's patient reimbursement, whether it's regulation, whether it's commercial to market the drug, whether it's the doctor giving the patient the information, or the nurse making sure the patient is being consented, the advocate making sure the patient understands their rights to consent to a study, we're all on the same side. Or even the CMC person who is making sure that the drug is getting to the site or wherever they're delivering it to. We're all really working for the same boss, which is the patient, and we are the boss, and at the same time. So that's how I will end it.
What book or quote has the
Oh,
biggest impact on your leadership journey?
what book? I'm somebody who's a bit of a voracious reader, and I don't know if there's a one thing that I would say that has had an impact necessarily. There's been multiple things depending on where I have been in the stream of time. And I think I had seen that question, but I still couldn't find a one thing. I'm one of these people where because I'm multifaceted, and I tend to think of myself as a multifaceted drug development type of person. There are different things that inspire me at different points. Like I said, even something like, for example, when remote monitoring was first being rolled out, there was a lot of panic among people who had roles of being a CRA. But for me, I realized that, oh, this is not a bad thing. What you're really trying to do is find ways in which you can have effective insights, better data insights to see and reduce the human error. So I dove headfirst into it, and at that time I used to read a lot of the I think it was called the Monitor. It's now online, but at that time it was the ACRP Monitor, and also the Soccer Journal, and different articles really on that helped me again, connect the dot and not see it as a threat, but see that, oh, this is actually opening it up to make it much more easier for people to participate in the process. So for me, things like that, and also different conferences that I have attended over the years. There was a closeout conference for a project that I worked on years ago for non-small cell lung cancer. And I'm not going to mention the company because, but there were two companies that were in this industry, and the two drugs that were marketed to put on the market. This was a closeout for the other drug that was not as popular, but actually the data of this particular drug was better than the most popular one that was being prescribed. I learned two things at that conference. There's a physician here. I don't mind mentioning her name. She's what So this was an international conference. It was held in Spain, but the physician who impacted me the most actually was one of our own from Canada, from Princess Margaret Hospital, Dr. Shepherd. She's a little lady, but she had very huge impact. I still remember her speech to this day. She said, "I don't understand why this other drug, which was the more popular drug, which was being prescribed, is the one which got basically the marketing. It was the marketing winner." Because if you look at the data, the serious adverse events of the other drug, which were closing out on that particular conference, was actually better for patients. But just because the marketing genius of that other company was better, they got their narrative out there. So it told me one thing: even when you've done all the work and you've put everything out there, you need to make sure that you're telling a good story. You're telling a story that can affect the hearts of people and give them confidence to be able to then be willing to participate in that drug. So coming back to what we said earlier, if you can involve more stakeholders effectively in the process, and they see that your data is good, then regardless of who has a better marketing scheme, they may be able to then participate much more fully and get better improved. Coming back to that was something that happened years ago, earlier in my career, but that impacted me a lot and made me see how you can be a leader in a different way. She wasn't a farmer person; she was a doctor, but her viewpoint on how she saw her patients helped me to see how everybody can play differently, even on the commercial end.
Okay, that's good. What's one daily habit that keeps you focused and grounded?
One daily habit. Well, again, I'm somebody who evolves. I used to be somebody who used to get up very early, and exercise was one thing that was part of my routine for a long time. These days, I'm older, I'm lazier. I, I have let go of some good habits, and I know it. I should probably get back into those good habits, but I've picked up some bad habits which are not good, which I know better. But sometimes in life, you don't want to do better, even if it's for yourself. It's fine. I think as far as you know what you're doing, as long as you're not harming anybody, as long as it makes you happy. And the reason why I'm saying this is that as long as you're not really harming, again, whether you're harming yourself or somebody else, if you understand the concept of, it's a Japanese concept of ikigai, right? So sometimes it's the smallest things that make us happy. It's not the big things. It's not the big check. It's not the nice house. It's not the big car. It's not the reputation. It can be as simple as, sunshine, or that you get up every morning and you can have your favorite cup of coffee. So I am somebody, I've learned that I am somebody who is growth oriented. And so if at a particular point or phase of my life, there's something that keeps me grounded or interested to wake up and continue to exist and be part of this dance that we call life, then I engage in it at that time. Like I said, I picked up some bad habits, which make me happy, but I've realized that I have to stop it. But it's what has been my new ikigai, which is maybe indulge a little bit too much in good food. but and again, that has only happened the last maybe year or two. But prior to that, it was the other good habits where I would get up, I'll do my yoga and all those things. But I decided I wanted to be quote unquote naughty for a little bit, and I think maybe now I've had my fill. as long as it's making me happy at that time. And coming back to your, let me tie back to the first question you asked. There is Henry Thoreau. So Henry Thoreau, he's somebody who lived, I think, in the 18th century or whatever. He said, you should really live life and suck the marrow out of life. That is something that I keep at the forefront of my mind. So whatever that means, whether it's in family, whether it's in entertaining myself, or whether it's in work, as long as I feel that I'm giving myself fully to that, then I'm happy. If I'm not doing that, then whatever it is that I'm doing, I need to stop and change it. And I think when you're willing to change, you're willing to pivot, you're willing to move to the next thing, and make sure that you keep going. That to me is the best way to live life. And I think hence why, again, I like clinical research, because that's giving me opportunities to pivot and change and do different things, wear different hats. I'm never really bored, and hence why I've done it for so long.
Yeah, that's a powerful lesson, right? Yes. Okay. Coming to the end of the discussion. So, thanks for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. It was
I
truly
did.
interesting and insightful discussion. Thank you again for your time and sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed sharing my experience and both my work and life experience, and talking to you.